Thanks for inviting me today. So I'll be talking about the Proactive Software Supply Chain Management Framework, or called P-SSCRM. I'm a professor at North Carolina State University. The middle icon there is for a National Science Foundation, U.S. National Science Foundation Center, supported by, on software supply chain. And then the Synopsys logo is there because this work was done when I was on sabbatical at Synopsys. So, everyone's aware of, the software supply chain, all of the attention on the software supply chain. This slide here is to show that 80% of a typical software product is open source or third-party code. Just above the line are it's a proprietary code. And if we lose faith in the supply chain, innovation will slow down. So, what our mission is in our center is to restore the faith in the software supply chain, despite all of the increase in attacks. This is the Sonatype report that shows basically an exponential increase in software supply chain attacks. So with all that, there's been attention on the US executive order and in Europe, the CRA. And so organizations are thinking like, what should I do? What should we do? And then also, some curiosity about what everyone else is doing related to this increase in software supply chain. And so I was tasked by Synopsys in my sabbatical to find out what is everyone doing? And so when I set off on that, I started to look at a bunch of specifically supply chain frameworks that talk about what people should do to reduce supply chain risk. And so some of them are here, the NIST SSDF, the SALSA framework. NIST has another framework, 800-161, that's both hardware and software supply chain. OpenSSF has the Secure Supply Chain Consumption Framework, or S2C2F. Cloud Native has a supply chain framework. OWASP has the supply chain framework, the Software Composition Verification Standard, and then BSIMM is very much like SAMM. I mean, it's included in there just to make it straight that Synopsys funded this work and BSIMM is theirs. And so that was the one that's different from the others because that's a more general. All of the others that were chosen specifically because they are frameworks on supply chain. And so what I did was, in this what is everyone doing question that I was tasked with by Synopsys, was I did a union of all of those different frameworks that I just talked about and created P-SSCRM from them. And to do that, and before that, I'll also say, as I did the union of all of them, it turned out to be 73 tasks, which each of these framework has a different vocabulary. This is the vocabulary I chose, which 73 lowest level things that people do. And those 73 are organized into 15 practices, and those 15 practices are organized into 4 different groups. And so the 4 groups are the governance group, there's a product group, environment group, and deployment group. The governance group has 5 different practices, and these are done by, you can see compliance, security policies, managing suppliers, training, and risk management. The product group is particularly done by developers. And so, security requirements, any kind of build security in, managing component choices and whatnot. Environment is DevOps and IT, so safeguarding artifact integrity, build integrity, and securing the environment. And then deployment is after the product is deployed, so responding to vulnerabilities and monitoring intrusion. And so again, these all come from the union of the frameworks. And so I'll show you what the framework looks like a little bit more in a moment, but what I did was map all the things to all the things, very much a many-to-many mapping, using what NIST would call bidirectional equivalence. So the same task, like they're at the same level. It's not a part whole. There's not some other relationship. This is at the same. And in what I did, in many cases, there were mappings between things already available. Like the SSDF had a lot of mappings in it. And the S2C2F had a lot of mappings. So if mappings between were available, I did use the mappings and did transitive mappings based upon what was available. But in many cases, I did, just read and try to find equivalence between them. And so what you'll see here is a specific task like organizational security requirements and which of the different frameworks had called out for that and identified there. So I did that. This naming convention, P21 is the group, which is the product group, the second practice, and the first task in that practice. So that's the naming convention I used. This is what each of the practices have. So in the P-SSCRM, there's a task name with an identifier. There's an objective, like why in the world would we want to do this anyway? A definition of what the practice is. The questions are assessment questions because I did do an assessment and, this framework is meant for assessment. So what are the things that I would ask? And then the mapping references. So each of the practices has that. Why did I use so many? I chose the practices, as I mentioned before, particularly because they were supply chain frameworks, with the exception of BSIMM. And also, as I talked to organizations, they would mention what ones that they use. Like, for example, the cloud native was not there in the beginning, but enough organizations mentioned the cloud native, which is the last one on this table. And so then I pulled it in. And so what this chart is meant to say is how many tasks came from each framework. So P-SSCRM has 73 tasks. The executive order and SSDF, which are essentially equivalent, has 34. Self-attestation, which is a US kind of thing. BSIMM, there's 125 tasks in BSIMM and 37 of them mapped to this framework and whatnot. So you can see on the rightmost column how many of the tasks in that framework made it into P-SSCRM. Also, it divides up the tasks that were pulled into the different groups. The red shows, I would say, what is the most influential framework for that group. So, for example, for the governance framework, the NIST 800-161 was the most influential framework. For the product, the SSDF was the most influential framework. For the environment, cloud native was, and for deployment, SSDF was. So the red shows you what's the most influential framework. In the brackets are tasks that only appeared in one of the frameworks. So, for example, NIST 161 had 5 tasks in the governance that didn't show up in any of the other frameworks. So really, they all did play a part. And so came up with the framework. Then the next question is, what's everyone else doing? That's what organizations want to know. And so I did do a large interview study, 9 companies, 7 large, 2 medium. I can't at this point say who they are. When the final report is done, then they'll have the ability to allow themselves to be named. But at this point, we're not at that. We haven't reached that yet. I would say that all of these organizations were early adopter, progressive companies, had specific and explicit efforts on reducing supply chain risk, which I don't think is the average case in industry out there. There were 61 interviews of about an hour and a half each. And these are the people who participated: 1 CISO, 27 governance people, 23 product people, and 10 environment and deployment people. And this is a polar chart, which all of you are familiar with doing, polar charts. And this is everyone together, all 9 companies. And when I did the interviews for each company, I gave a rating of 0, meaning they don't do that practice at all, 0.25 is they're starting to talk about it. They know they should do something about it. 0.5 is they've made some progress. 0.75, like they're almost there, and 1.0 means they achieved the objective. So it's not binary, it's there's a gradient there. And similar to your own polar charts, you can see, when it's outside, that means that they're more mature, inside, less mature. And so some of the more mature, like securing the development environment. So IT is doing a good job at securing development environment. P4, discovering vulnerabilities, people are doing a pretty good job at discovering vulnerabilities. To me, what was most marked in this is the ones that were inside. And so the ones that were especially on the inside were P3, which is component and container choice, and P5, component and container management. And it's concerning because the attacks through the components, that's a major attack vector for supply chain attacks. And the tasks that would mitigate that, and reduce the risk were not being adopted yet at that point. Another one that's low is build, and that's build infrastructure. So attacks through the build infrastructure, such as SolarWinds, CodeCov, like those tasks are not being adopted. So like it's the shape of the chart and the attack vectors made me concerned. Also, this is the top 10 tasks. So these are the tasks that were most adopted: authentication, having automated security scanning tools. So that doesn't mean they run them, that means they have them. Role-based training, build output, meaning the output of a build is put in a different place than the source code. Roles and responsibilities, for handling all these things are set. Boundary protection, software license checks, protection of information at rest, vulnerability disclosure, and environmental separation. So all of these done pretty well. The color scheme shows you which group they're in. And then the bottom 11, there was a tie, so I chose 11. The things that are done the least, so reproducible builds, SBOM consumption. So, when people do anything with their SBOMs, requiring signed commits, delivering provenance information, preventing component vetting bypass. So if there is a process for vetting components, how easy it is to bypass that process, and the answer was pretty easily. Produce attestation, build process monitoring. So, are people checking to see if, like a SolarWinds, people are in their build process? Deliver software bill of materials. So on the bottom 10 is consuming a software bill of materials or delivering it, quite low. The task around building or producing a software bill of materials is higher, but once you produce it, nothing seems to be happening with them. Using ephemeral credentials, using compilation and build defensively to make errors if there's concerns, and using trusted repositories. And that's saying that developers or team members need to only take components from, say, NPM or PyPy or something, or can they just go anywhere to anyone's website and find something that they like and bring it in? And the answer was people get anything from wherever they want. So from future work, some of the things that we're doing is evaluating P-SSCRM against prominent attacks. So we're looking at XC, SolarWinds, and Log4j, and the events of what happened there, and then mapping that to the controls or tasks to see, like, if someone followed any of P-SSCRM or any of the frameworks, could they have prevented that? And so in doing that, what we'll be finding is what are the gaps in the frameworks, and also what are the most needed tasks in order to prevent. And then we also are automating at least part of P-SSCRM assessment. We're still in the process, like when I did it the first time, it was all 100% interviews, but maybe there's a way to have things like spreadsheets and whatnot to make the process a little bit easier. Expand mapping standards to other sources, particularly non-US sources. Do more interviews, longitudinal study, and collect feedback and collaboration. And then call to your action. What I would love is if there was anyone in OWASP who would go back and look at the SCVS mapping to P-SSCRM, that would be great. I took most of those mappings from Mappings Through Others, and so someone who really intimately knows SCVS would be great to participate with. Take your comments, suggestions, and questions, and also, like, are you interested in your company in participating in an assessment, or any other kind of collaboration? I would love that as well. As far as acknowledgement, I did have some Synopsys colleagues, and then also a big partner was Yahoo. They really had a lot to say about the frameworks. I appreciate that. There's a NIST contractor who helped all the interviewees, and then also the National Science Foundation for their funding. And I have a URL, a QR code if you wanted to take a look at P-SSCRM. And that's it.